guys I know have a lot to do with empathy in the workplace. I feel like one of my pet peeves about kind of HR ideology is this thing about firing where you drag somebody in. They know they're going to get fired. You're dragging them into this horrible meeting. You've got somebody else there. You're telling them they're going to be fired. It's just like, I ask myself, why go through that whole drama? Why is that necessary? Like, why don't you make it easier on people? Why don't you give them a phone call and just say, look, I want to give you a heads up. This is going to happen. Just so that you protect them and their emotions and you don't drag them into a place where they feel unsafe and attacked and humiliated and so forth. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm hoping you guys are on it, of greater sensitivity to empathy in the workplace and having it inform more of how things are done.
Yeah, definitely. When we see another person, there is this intrinsic empathetic thing that you want to connect. And obviously society, narcissism is at a higher rate than it's ever been. Empathy is lower than it's ever been. And now there's this movement about toxic empathy, that somehow empathy is becoming a bad thing, which is very confusing to me. It's not just being taught to us, it's being untaught. It's being like, let's uncheck that box. Mm-hmm. And that's happening to us in a lot of different ways, through our personal environment, but also through, the bigger context of what's going on in culture right now. But, really the difference between sympathy and empathy is just being willing to step into that person in front of you, to step into that situation in front of you. And you don't have to understand all of it. You can be at the shallow end of the pool or the deep end of the pool. Just get in the pool, mm-hmm. and you can work your way down to the deep end, and you can get better understanding. From a business standpoint, we believe that businesses giving back, not only does that make a difference within the culture of the business, but obviously it's making an impact in the causes that we care about. How have you seen that play out, and how have you seen businesses thrive by making a commitment to connect through philanthropy and through empathy?
Well, everybody wants to sit at the cool kids table. And in Hollywood, a lot of being the cool kids table is being passionate about making the world a better place in some way. And many writers and producers and directors are very proud of creating stories that inspire us. Hollywood has been such an incredible force in our society and culture for righting wrongs, telling stories of injustice, and these immigrant Jewish godfathers of the business who started the movie studios, for instance, they kind of understood what it was like to live in a world where there wasn't empathy and to be otherized in a culture. And they kept on bringing stories to the screen that made heroes of people who fought that and overcame that. So, whether it was To Kill a Mockingbird or, you can pick your favorite wonderful movie from way back when that dramatized a story about something important, something that needed to change, something that needed to be improved. And those stories were always, of course, filled with empathy, because we actually don't care about issues per se. We care about people.
That's right.
And so if a good storyteller has to activate the empathy in the audience in order for the story to be conveyed, even if it's a lighter or just, a thriller or something like that, you're still like, you're pushing all the buttons of, I'm thinking of the movie Inception. Yeah. I don't remember the plot all that well, but you know what? You're always in good territory telling a story when it's a father who's trying to be reunited with his family or to rescue a child or whatever. We all relate to that on such a primal level. If you think of one of my favorite movies, The Godfather, here's this story. It's really a father-son story. It starts with a guy who says, I'm not my father and I'm not going to be him, and my life's going to be a different path. But when his father is shot and almost killed and in grave danger, he does everything he can to save and protect his father. That's what the story's about. The story's not about the mafia. It's not about organized crime. It's not about whatever. And that's the reason we connect with the story. So I think the very nature of what we do is so associated with that. Now, one aspect of that you're asking about, Brad, is philanthropy and so forth. And because I think the culture started with this social consciousness, the cool kids in our business still want to be socially conscious and do things that improve society. Sometimes, by the way, the dark side of that is just performative wokeness, to coin a phrase, which is bullshit. But, some of it is that, and then some of it is real, and it's just, we have the good fortune of being in a business culture here that praises people who raise lots of money for charity and people who do good things and people who provide, wealthy people who open their wallets and help the less fortunate and so forth. So you see a lot of that. That's one thing, and that's especially good for people who have a lot of money but not a lot of time.
Right.
And then there's the other side of it, which is people who have more time than money that can volunteer and do other things. And then for some of us in the middle, it's a balancing act, but I have found, for me, of course, sure, we all have an obligation to support charitable things and to help in that way. And then for me, I think it's all about, I also have to give of myself as a human in order to really feel a satisfaction about that, So for me, it kind of needs to be both.
Right.
I was looking at two big problems in our city that I ended up doing volunteer work for. One was the mayor's crisis response team. Gee, there are all these people that get super traumatized by terrible, horrible, horrific, spectacularly horrific accidents and traumatizing events, and they need support. Volunteer work that I did before that was I worked for almost 25 years as a volunteer court-appointed special advocate that was advocating for kids who are in the dependency system, who've been removed from their homes for neglect, abuse, or abandonment. Yeah. So and that to me kind of connected me to the community more and activated my empathetic side, and becomes more of a meaningful way to do something good. When we were talking about the origins of empathy in our culture and in ourselves, I was fortunate. I grew up a preacher's kid. My dad was a rabbi, and he certainly practiced what he preached. And I remember him saying, the famous story of a very famous rabbi was asked how he was going to summarize Judaism in one sentence while standing on one leg. And he said, "Oh, that's easy. What you would not like done to you, don't do to your neighbor." That's the whole thing. And what is that? That's empathy.
Yes, 100%. Just to bring things back to empathy and company culture, as both of you know, I had a great uncle that was 99 that passed recently. And I was in the workplace and, going through the day perfectly fine. And I went into our director of operations office just to kind of, say, hey, the day's going along. Might take off early to go make family plans. And as I walked in the doorway, it was like the rush of emotion hit and I just broke down. Tears or waterwork, and I'm in the middle of the office. I'm like, oh, come on. I'm in an office full of engineers. I don't want to cry here in the middle of all these men. Come on. This is the worst time to do it. And in that moment, I could see the director's eyes, and he's like, it's fine. It's okay. You can call it, have a break. And it took him about 10 to 15 seconds, but then he finally broke that wall. And it was like, you know what? I'm not a supervisor right now. I'm a human. Right. And he stood up and he just broke that wall. And he said, come here. He gave me a hug. And I didn't know it meant so much at the time that he was able to do that. But now it's set the track going forward for a whole new relationship and how we now chat and communicate in the office, and how we now understand each other, right? It's now given a new level to what we already had as a business relationship. So just for me, I know that can kind of shape company culture and change things. So, David, throughout your years in the different organizations, is there certain things or ways that you see empathy shaping that company culture and kind of, leading, or things that can change the perception for the employees and the folks that are there at the company?
Yeah, just full transparency. I can think of both extremes in my experience. The extremely unempathetic management, and then the and everything in between. I remember one company I worked for had a big boss who was kind of spectacularly without empathy. Mm-hmm. And I once asked a psychologist, I said, how did that guy get like that? He goes, probably parents that said, I don't care what you feel. Ooh, okay. So first note to self, if I become a parent, don't be that parent. And, I think people want to work for people that have an empathetic side because it's just too miserable otherwise. At the end of the day, it just becomes a place that people are always trying to leave. And even if there are longtime people who are there, you start realizing they're also sick in some way. They don't love themselves enough to get out of that toxic stew, So, or that look, I also want to be empathetic and go. They may have kids and other obligations that make it difficult, but there's also something else. There is a certain magnetic pull that some people have towards just being abused or working for people that are terrible, and you don't be one of those people is what I was saying. I remember there was another boss I had who remembers this boss that I'm talking about, the unempathetic one, and he said everybody should work for that guy once.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true because it totally makes you appreciate the other side of the fence for sure.
Well, yeah, so I mean, in some cases I learned what not to do, but I guess I've been pretty lucky in that most of the people, like even one of my first bosses was a very charismatic guy, and he was very charming and entertaining in public, and he could be very ferociously, tough in private. But on the other hand, he always had an empathetic side, and I would see him do all sorts of things like his bark was so much worse than his bite. He would just trash somebody and then kind of do something nice for him. Like his actions were usually in the empathetic category, although his yapper was sometimes harsh.
Right.
And even those people you can kind of deal with because sort of deep down they're a good person and they've just got this. Also, I think I have this feeling about society that in a general sense humanity is trending upward on the sort of enlightenment scale. It's long, it's fitful, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but that in the long run there really is a progression of enlightenment, including empathy.
Yep.
Well, I think that the takeaway from a lot of what's been shared by both of you that I've been hearing, there's something that's happening that's triggering an awakening towards empathy. At the same time, we find that it's at a low level in history. I used to run an exhibit that we called it the empathy effect. And the idea behind it was that where there was not much empathy in a community, apathy would overrun it. And what we learned over time was it was actually apathy was the active ingredient that triggered empathy. And it was when an apathetic mindset began to encroach on people who would normally be bystanders and be fine in a sense that it's not my problem and I'm not going to deal with it. Suddenly it encroaches into your life in a way where it creates a response. And so we changed the name of the exhibit to the apathy effect, which meant the more apathy that's there, the more empathy is going to rise. And so as this is more pervasive and as we get more vocal with kind of our disconnect and words that separate us from each other, we're also seeing people who rise up and say, wait a minute, I want to be the counter to that. So we're believing that's going to happen for us as individuals, but we want to see that happen in our workspaces too. And we're so grateful for people like you, David, who I commend you on being a part of people's lives on the worst day of their life. And we had a lot to learn from you today, and we're so grateful for it. Thank you, David.
That's so kind of you, Brad. Thank you, Preston. Thank you, my brother.
Yes.
And really commend you guys for doing what you're doing and such an important subject and being a force for good. So that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Godspeed.
Let's do it together.
All right. Right on.
All right.
I really appreciate it.